And now, the survival show that survived 149 previous episodes. In this episode, we sit down with Marshall from Primary Arms. He's going to clarify optics for your rifle. Howdy, and welcome to In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. This is episode number 150. I'm your host, Aaron, and you are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Marshall, thank you for joining us in the rabbit hole.
Glad to be here.
Now, you are the owner of Primary Arms. You are both a retailer of optics, guns, toys, and manufacture your own brand of optics as well, as I understand it.
That's correct. And we're also a wholesaler for many other products now as well for other dealers.
Oh, very neat. I didn't know y'all had gotten into that yet.
Yeah, that's been a growing part of our business. You know, it comes from the fact that we have our own brand. And for, years, we were getting requests to sell our products to other dealers. And so we've put a division in to do that. And we've become a distributor for many of the other brands we carry as well as part of that.
Oh, very cool. Now, you got your start, as far as this all goes, in optics. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, the story is one of those starting not in the garage, but I had started another business. This was about 9 years ago now. And that was it was actually a chain of barbershops, and I don't cut hair, so there wasn't a lot for me to do much of the time. Uh-huh. And so the start was as I was on the gun forums, like I still am. And at the time for ARs, there was not much in the way of lower price optics. There were Aimpoints, ACOGs, the real high-end stuff. And the guys were buying the counterfeits on eBay. And I was really on there saying, this is really not good for the industry. The stuff's crap. You're promoting this. This was early days, eBay and saying, you're making a business for these guys in counterfeits, and it's just not a good thing. And one of the guys said, well, you come up with something that's not a counterfeit that fits this format, and we'll buy it. And that's what I did. We found the source. My partner made the first trip to China to check out the factories, and that's really how we started.
Oh, that's pretty neat. I'd never heard the full story before. That's really cool.
So the funny part was it literally started in the storeroom we had for the barbershops, and which was in the back of one of the shops. And people would come in, was this Primary Arms? No, they're in the back, and it was fun in the early days to be in that business. And I recently sold that business, so thankfully I'm out of the haircutting business and focusing on this full time.
So you got out of one heavily regulated industry and into an even more heavily regulated industry.
Oh, that's true. That's true. This has been more fun and has grown pretty dramatically for us. So.
Now, admittedly, rifle scopes and optics are not my strong suit. My primary instruction was in iron sights, and that's kind of where I've mostly stayed, other than just going and saying, okay, well, I need some kind of optic, so I'm just going to buy a Trijicon because I know it, or I'm just going to buy an Aimpoint because I know it. Now, I do know one of your employees really well, and at one point I was looking for a red dot, and he was like, here, why don't you try this? And so I got it, and I was like, wow, this is actually pretty cool. But before we get too deep into red dots and stuff, I wanted to back up and really start things off with the very basics of optics and get a real sense of it for people like myself that have always been around guns and stuff like that and have been around optics, but never actually understood necessarily what they were getting themselves into or what to even really look for. To start with price, because that's, always the big one, and especially when it comes to glass. I know the advice I was always given was spend about as much on your glass as you do on the rifle. And I guess, what do you recommend with that?
Well, everybody has a budget, and optics are like many and I'll call them hobbyist products. Like if you look at photography or you look at audio equipment, where they're certainly just cheap crap. I mean, if you go buy a boombox for $20, you're not expecting much. But there's a lot in the middle. And then as you go up in quality, TVs today are the best example. And of course, they become a commodity. But you go look, it's not like you're going to look at a $600 TV, flat screen, and you look at the newest, latest one. It's not just crazy difference in the way it looks. And then that's somewhat similar in optics, although you got to factor in the reliability issue when you're using it on a weapon. So you add reliability with glass, you add clarity, you add, how well they track if you're have an optic, a scope where you're using the turrets to adjust for distance. There's just a lot of factors in how well they're made and how well they're assembled. But you get it to a point where you're paying more, a lot more in some cases, for a little better image quality, a better glass quality. So it's a pretty wide range. Certainly, again, you got to look at the application. Like over the years, we have constantly told people that, are saying this is for law enforcement use. Get an Aimpoint or Geotech. I mean, it's just built to a higher standard, right? We're not going to be able to build an optic in Asia and sell it for $100 that's going to be the quality of an Aimpoint. It's just not reality. The quality's getting up, and we've got one factory who's getting there. The price is going to be over $200 to get anywhere close to that kind of quality. So there's no free ride when it comes to that. So in the optics world too, again, you've got a lot of, there's no one scope for every application. So there's a lot of things to choose. You got to, and again, when it comes up on the forums, the first question you do ask is, okay, what are you going to do with it? And give us a ballpark and price, because, you're right. If you've just bought a $2,000 rifle and you can afford it, get that Night Force or, a higher end Vortex scope. We've got some coming out that are going to fall in that range too, but they're going to be over $1,000. And if you just bought a Rimfire 700, at the local sporting goods store for $250, you may not be able to spend $1,000 on a scope. So the budget has to play into it. But we've been very clear when it comes to law enforcement, or where your life is on the line, it's a very different decision. Or the shit hit the fan situation. So if you really are saying this is going to be the one weapon I'm going to have, just in case, that makes it a different decision from a price and quality standpoint, because you want to minimize the risk that it's ever going to fail.
And that makes perfect sense versus buying, say, a red dot or something like that for doing, I don't know, a 3-gun shoot or something like that, where your life isn't really on the line.
Yeah, and again, the reliability has gotten better. There's a lot more players, not just us, in the more moderately priced products. So the bar has been raised in how good the lower priced products are. So, but you can't produce an Aimpoint for $100. I mean, they just put too much into it.
Yeah. And going back to your example of TVs, talking about the bottom and the top getting closer together. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, if you wanted a really fancy TV, a really high-end TV, there was a huge, huge, huge gap between that TV and the TV you went down to Sears and bought.
Yeah, and electronics may be a little different, but we're seeing that too. There's a lot more people making optics today. There's more factories in Asia making optics, primarily China. But again, we know they have some capabilities there, and they're producing some of the best electronics. So there are a few factories emerging that there's a quality market. For many, many years, that was not the case in optics. Philippines now, there's some higher quality product coming out of the Philippines. Japan, still the ultra high end, and I don't see that changing. The labor costs there is just so high. But that's where we went to source our higher end products, because they still do some of the best optics in the world out of Japan.
Marshall, let's take a moment for this quick message. Do you get at least $1 worth of value out of each episode of ITRH? That would add up to roughly $4.33 a month worth of benefit you get from this show. Now, for as little as $2.50 a month, you could be supporting the work we do here. That's 1/5 the price of a single box of gun food a month. Visit itrh.net today to find out more about the ITRH Armada benefits and what extra value you'll receive from becoming a supporting member. Again, that's itrh.net. Check it out and become a member today. Military and first responders, email me at itrh@intherabbithole.com to get a special discount. Now, back to Marshall on understanding optics for firearms. To get into the kind of nitty gritty and figure out, for people to really figure out, like, what, I guess when they're looking at optics, what should they be aware of in the optic itself that they're looking for in trying to pick something out once they've established a budget and a purpose? What are the differentiating factors as far as quality goes?
You really got to narrow it down to the use. And so let's take 3-gun. You've picked the 1 to 6 for 3-gun. Again, the budget's going to come into place. You're going to look at the ones in that price range. And then the reticle is a big focus now. And that's the big focus for us and for a lot of other people in the industry, is to do more with the reticle, to do more bullet drop compensation in the reticle so that you can quickly adjust for distance. So, you've narrowed it down now. You say, okay, I want a 1 to 6. I'm going to use it for 3-gun. Then you look in that price range and you look at the players that are involved and you kind of look at what other people are using, especially the people that are successful in 3-gun, and make a decision. And again, the reticles for that application, and starting to see more of that in the hunting world. I'm not a hunter, so we don't get too far in the hunting world. I've got other people that are more experienced in that, but we're starting to see that. More people are doing more with reticles in the hunting world for wind leads and for tracking the moving game. And so the reticles really emerging as a useful part of the optic and a part of the decision, because there are some reticles that are better suited for some applications than others. The quality of the optics is like anything else. You look at what's out there, what people are saying about it. You look at the reputation of the factory. You look at the manufacturer, and you make the best decision you can.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you say the quality of the optic, I know there's a few different things that play into that. What are they?
Well, the quality of the glass, but again, it's not like you're going to look through an optic and say, again, there's certainly some bad optics where you look around the edge of the scope and the image on the edge is distorted. That's pretty noticeable. But you get into, even moderately priced optics, like you look through one of our lower price, like a $260 scope, and you look at a higher end scope in daylight, you're not going to see a dramatic difference. The low light performance is where the coatings will come into place. Again, you're hunting at a low light, or you're looking for, again, that one optics that you need just in case you're in a life and death situation. Low light performance will come into play, and that's generally where the higher end optics shine, because the quality of the coating on the lens, the light transmission is the challenge. When you got a bunch of glass and it's all in coated glass, the quality of that coating will start making a big difference. So again, if you're doing 3-gun and it's all daylight, that's a less of an issue. Mm-hmm. If you're doing long-range shooting and you're using the turrets and dialing the turrets a lot, then the mechanical part of that's going to come into play. Quality of those turrets, how well they track. You've got to run a test and say, are they accurate? And you're putting more stress mechanically on it by doing that. So again, that becomes, the mechanical quality becomes more important, and you're not just looking at the glass in that case.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. I didn't realize that coatings on the glass actually made that big of a difference.
Again, and not in every situation. If you're shooting in broad daylight, it's not very noticeable. People we'll have a customer that'll look at our moderately priced scope and say, yeah, it looks great. And they'll look at a more expensive one. I don't see much difference. Well, you're not going to in most situations. You will in low light. And sometimes at greater distances and the higher magnification scopes, they'll show up a little bit more there. But it's back to the TV scenario. You're going to pay a lot more for a little more clarity. And if you have them side by side, you might see it. But you start getting low light situations is where it's really going to be more noticeable. Where literally, in some cases, you just won't see something with one scope that you would see with the other. But it's not a situation that people shoot at very often. They shoot it in dusk and low light. Hunters do quite a bit.
Now, going back to reticles, I've seen like a real explosion in all these different reticle patterns in the last few years. And I remember when I bought my first ACOG, it had the drop compensator on it, and that was really cool. But I'm really seeing a lot of different stuff now. How much of that is actually useful, and how much of that is actually just starting to get to the point where it's just distracting? How does somebody really go about choosing a reticle like that?
Again, you got to look at the application. It's been a big focus for us. We're in an industry where there's a lot of things that are bought because they look cool. And, that's part of the industry, and, that's okay.
Yeah.
And there's some reticles that they're designed because they look cool.
Yeah.
And there's some that were designed to do something and they don't do it quite so well. So I always tell people, if you're going to a range, you're shooting fixed at 100 yards, and you're sitting on a bench, you don't need much. You need a crosshair. So again, it's back to the application. And you got to look and say, does it really do what you're trying to do? So there are a lot that don't. There are a lot of, we've seen some high-end ones come out that have proven not terribly effective because they didn't actually do the research behind it to say, does it work in a real-world situation? It may have worked on paper. So you got to kind of look at the reputation of, are people saying, yes, this works? And again, what are you doing with it? If you're going to the range and shooting at a fixed distance, you don't need a real complicated reticle. If you're shooting movers and you're shooting unknown distances, there's some now that we've hooked up with a guy that's pretty brilliant when it comes to that you can even do ranging within the reticle easily, quickly. You can always do it with a mill-based reticle or an MIO reticle by doing some quick calculations. But there's some now that are set up for specifics, like one for deer hunting that will let you do accurate ranging very quickly within the reticle. Those are some of the things that have really come into play in the reticle side. And again, there's more competition, so companies are looking for a way, what can we do different and better? And the reticle's been one way to do that.
To go to something fairly basic when it comes to optics, and we'll just kind of stick in the realm of hunting scopes and scopes in general, what impact does magnification have, and how does somebody decide on magnification, I guess, based on the application?
The natural tendency is to say more magnification is better. All examples, I'll give you one of what we had a 3X scope, fixed 3X, that was really popular. And we came out with a new one that was only 2.5X for a very specific reason. And it hasn't sold well. People actually got mad at me because, well, why'd you make it cheaper? Well, you did make it cheaper. 3X, you really couldn't use it very well at close quarters. If you were trying to shoot at 15 feet or, even 25 yards even, it was a little challenging. By going down a little bit in magnification in this case, now all of a sudden you've got an optic that you can use at close range out to effectively, 400 or 500 yards even. But the natural tendency is more and better. When you get into variable optics, you got to start getting into front focal plane scopes if you want the reticle to be useful at all those magnifications. I'll give you a good example there is long range, especially here in Texas. If you're shooting on a hot day in Texas, you're trying to shoot 800, 1,000 yards. You can't do it at 25 power. The mirage, the heat signature coming off the ground is just not going to work. You've got to dial down to usually probably 10 power. So it doesn't mean that you wouldn't want that 25 power scope, but it means that you're not going to be able to use it that much on a hot day in Texas. And you don't have to have it to go out to 1,000 yards. right? So again, back to the application, you'll see the bench rest shooters, which I'm getting old enough now that everybody tells me you get over 60, you're going to get into bench rest shooting, because you sit there, your gun's locked in a bench, and you're trying to shoot the smallest groups you can at 100 yards. And these guys are there with 30 power scopes at 100 yards, but they're trying to shoot literally through the same hole.
Mm-hmm.
And you're hand loading. And so, again, the application is very different, because at 100 yards, you're not going to have a lot of mirage. And you're trying to tweak it to the same hole. Back to the lower power scopes, if you're, in a self-defense situation, you don't need to shoot in the same hole. You've got a little bigger range that you can hit at. Usually in those situations is how fast you can get on target, how fast you can assess the range that you're at, and protect yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you're not trying to shoot dime-sized groups. So it's back to the application. A lot of that will depend on, again, the how much magnification you need to use. The higher magnification, the narrower the field of view. If you're hunting, you're shooting something that's moving, yeah, it'd be great to be able to to see that closer up with a higher power optic, but you're not going to see, you're going to have a very narrow field of view. You're not going to be able to track the moving target. So always trade-offs.
Yeah. I think, from what I understand, that's a large reason why the military is stuck with a fixed 10x scope. Well, that and anything over 10, as I understand it, you start to actually see your heartbeat in the scope.
Yeah, I mean, the military will use higher power, variables on their sniper rifles. So, there are times, and I'll say this too, that it's nice to dial up even beyond where you're going to take the shot and just get a closer view of what's going on. That would be the case in occasion where, the Navy or East American Sniper, they're using higher powered scopes, and a lot of times they'll zoom in, get a view of exactly what's going on, make sure it's really the target you want to go after, and you may zoom out a little bit to take the shot.
Okay. Moving on to, I guess, the next kind of physical part of a scope. What impact does tube size have on a scope's function and usefulness? Because you see all different kinds.
So it's mainly to give you more elevation adjustment. Because inside, the components are generally the same size, meaning, a 34 millimeter tube means just that the internals can move farther. So that's really what it's designed for.
Okay. Completely did not know that. Good to know. What impact then does, say, the bell of the scope have?
Your light gathering comes from that, the objectives that lets light in.
Mm-hmm.
And so tube size has no effect on that.
Okay.
Because again, the main reason is the internal components generally are not any bigger on a 34 millimeter tube scope. It's just there to give it more room to go up and down. So the objective size being larger is what will give you a little more light gathering.
So, I see these scopes that are straight towards the end. I know there's some tactical 1 to 6 power scopes and stuff like that are just a straight. They have no discernible bell. Why is that? Why would somebody want that?
Well, the 1 to 6, I mean, the goal is to get it compact and lightweight. And we've experienced that in our world, where sometimes people will give up some clarity to get a wider scope. So you're not looking for greater light gatherings. Again, 1 to 6, you're using it in most light situations. It's fine.
Mm-hmm.
You're not trying to hunt at dusk with it for the most part. So it's lighter, because the bigger the piece of glass, the heavier the scope is. Glass is heavy.
Mm-hmm. So what is parallax, and how does that play into picking out a scope?
Generally, under 10 power, it's not a significant issue. So if you look at like 1 to 6s or most fixed powers, 10 powers or less, there's no parallax adjustment. And most people will call the side parallax, or even the front. It's loaded on the front bell in a lot of cases. Today, it's mostly on the side. They'll call it a focus adjustment. It's not. So it will act like a focus, meaning it's going to, yes, you turn that parallax adjustment, it's going to look out of focus and look in focus. So you get it where it looks in focus, but then what you're trying to do is put the optic on the target, move your head a little bit side to side, and you're trying to dial out any movement of the reticle.
Ah, okay.
That's the final goal. And in some cases, you may find it's not the clearest point, right? Everything's set up, the distance, your eyes, whatever. So your real goal with the parallax adjustment is to remove any movement in that reticle so that you're getting the most accurate shot. Again, it's really critical if you're shooting, longer range, 1,000 yards, you're going to take a little more time, you're going to dial it out. Those longer range scopes, especially the variable powers above 10, are going to have it. And you're dialing out that movement. But most people call it a focus adjustment. Shorter distances is less of an issue. Back to the bench rest guys again, it's more of an issue because there even a tiny bit of movement's going to throw them off. Again, it's back to the application. Hunting, it's important, but generally less because the movement at most hunting distances is not going to make a difference in the kill. I mean, it's going to be a slight movement. Again, you're going out to 1,000 yards, a slight movement can throw you off 8.5 a foot. If you're off just a tiny bit, by the time you get to 1,000 yards, you're way off.
Yeah. Yeah, what is it? The width of a human hair movement at the end of a barrel translates to about an inch at 100 yards.
I can't relate it to numbers. I just know that, it's the old scenario. Someone says, man, I'm so good at 100 yards. Why is it so hard when I get out farther? Well, how big's your group at 100 yards? Yeah, you're right. If you're shooting a less than an inch group at 100 yards, you go out to 1,000. Now you're pretty far off target.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So moving on to first focal plane. I remember when I really first started getting into tactical stuff and longer range shooting, it really wasn't that big of a thing. And in recent years, it seems like it's really become a pretty big thing. And it's kind of a neat feature. So what is really first focal plane?
Well, that means the reticle is going to stay in the same relation to the target at all magnifications. So fixed power scope, it's not an issue.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not one or the other. Variable power, just that. So again, if you've got a simple crosshair, less of an issue. You're not using the reticle for anything but that very center. If you got one of these more complicated reticles, the bullet drop, the wind, the ranging, nothing is going to be accurate except at one magnification with the first focal point. With the second focal point scope. Meaning, okay, I've got a 1:6. Good examples are 1:6. If I'm shooting longer distance and I need to use the bullet drop or I need to use the wind, you crank it up to 6. Right? You go below 6, you're just using the center dot or horseshoe, and you're taking a quick shot, and you're not using any other features. You put that same reticle on a front focal point scope, and now all the other features will work at any magnification. That's the difference. When does that become important? Back to that scenario, I'm saying you're shooting at 1,000 yards with your 25 power scope. The mirage is so great, you have to dial down. Well, I still want to be able to see my shot, see that I missed it 2 mils, or if the case of a sniper type scenario where you've got a spotter saying hold 2 mils to the right, you've got to have a reticle that's going to stay on at the lower magnification so you can hold 2 mils to the right. If you don't, that reticle is no longer of use to you unless you have a front focal plane scope. So there's still plenty of applications where it's just not necessary. Again, hunting at a fixed distance where you're just using the center crosshair. There's a lot of hog hunting here in Texas, and they hunt with, there's a feeder, and you're at a known distance, right? You've got everything dialed in for that distance. You're just using the center crosshair. You don't need it in that application. Doesn't mean that you wouldn't get it because you're using that same weapon for other application.
I gotcha. And you brought up a great one, which is hunting, and I guess we could go ahead and get into the more specific applications for these optics. In basic terms, what is somebody really looking for? Or I guess should they be looking for balancing usefulness and cost when going for a hunting scope or shopping for a new hunting scope, I should say?
Yeah, not not far from the expert in the hunting world, but again, the thing is, fixed distances or variable distance. You can get a really good laser rangefinder today, so that you can get a distance pretty quick of where you're trying to shoot. You don't have to use the reticle for that in a lot of cases with hunting, but things do happen quick, and there are times that the ability to not have to take your eye off the scope to the laser rangefinder could be useful. But again, fixed distances versus situations where you're walking and you're going to have to quickly ascertain the distance, that could make a difference in what you're doing. The reticles, you don't tend to see as complicated reticles in hunting because you don't have the time to do as much. It's got to be a reticle that's simpler. Even the ones that you'll see that do have some ranging and bullet drop, they tend to be simpler than some of the tactical reticles because things will happen pretty quick.
Okay. I see a lot of scopes that tend to sit next to the hunting scopes that are labeled as or perhaps marketed as rimfire scopes. What's the difference between, say, a rimfire scope and your run-of-the-mill Nikon or Leupold or any of the other kind of common hunting scope brands?
Well, the biggest thing with rimfire, if you're talking just 22 rimfires, you don't have to have the recoil rating. You can make a much less expensive scope that's going to hold up just fine. You could certainly use in some cases, the weight as well, but that's going to get back to the construction. You can make a nice 1-inch tube scope because you're not going to be shooting out to great distances with your rimfire. There are some, I know that people are getting some farther out with some of the higher power ones, but typically your rimfire, shorter distance, less recoil. And so you can make a smaller, lighter weight scope and less expensive scope that still will hold up to the recoil.
Oh, okay. So when you get into the world of sniper scopes, and some of that is just kind of hype, but what is really the difference with a sniper scope?
You're typically looking at higher power, variable magnification in many cases, and you're dialing the turrets. So the precision of the turrets becomes really way more important. Certainly in a hunting scope where you're zeroing it and all it has to do is hold zero. You're going to zero those turrets and in a lot of cases never touch them again for the rest of the season. It's back to what I was saying earlier. The true sniper scenario is you've got a spotter who's calling the distance, you're looking at the shot, and if you miss, they want to see the shot, see where their hit went if they can. So they do, in many cases, go a little higher power. And they're going to adjust with the turrets so that they're right on. And so you got to have very accurate turrets. And this is where you'll typically see front focal plane so that the turret matches the reticle in all magnifications. They didn't talk about that before. So if you've got a turret set in mils, you've got a mil dot reticle, and you see, wow, I'm 2 mils low. All I got to do is go up and adjust my turret to get me up 2 mils, and I'm dead on the target. So the quality of the turret and the turret matching and the reticle being useful in all magnifications all comes together from your sniper scope.
Moving on to rings, to mount scopes. How big of a difference is there actually in this? Because some of them are pretty cheap. You can run down to the local sporting goods store and they feel kind of junky, but who knows? And then you move on to some of the much more expensive stuff. How big of a difference is there actually with those?
Yeah, again, it's like I said earlier, you pay more for higher quality, and as you get higher in price, you tend to pay a lot more for a little bit advance. So if you talk clarity, again, you've got $1,000 plus scopes. So it's going to be generally a pretty good scope. So if I want to get better in low light situation in that scope, it's going to take some technology. It's going to take the factory really putting some time into the coatings or the quality of the lenses to get better than that $1,000 scope. In case Smith and Bender, as far as I know, is the only company that still makes everything themselves. Because they want to control everything and get it as good as they can get it. And, they're considered still some of the premier scopes out there. And you pay the price. And it's made in Germany. We know the labor's cost is high, but, there's still their commitment to control every part of the product. Now you get into the lower price ones, and well, even at any price range, you still say, what's the failure rate, right? And you expect as you get a little higher in price and you keep moving up that there's, they're a little more rugged as well. What's the reputation? You got to talk to people. The best people I've found to talk to are the guys that are doing classes, because they'll see people filter through and will see what tends to fail. What also, though, is you see up in the classes, you'll see guys there with a bone stock running 700 and a moderately priced scope, and they're doing just as well as the guys, they're there with the higher price gear. So as long as there's not a failure, the performance is pretty good, and there's plenty of moderately priced stuff that's reliable.
Mm.
So, well, that really answers your question. So, I mean, again, the scenario of the guy with the bone stock running 700 and, a 3 to 5, 600 hour scope, he can shoot out to 1,000 yards and do just as well as the person next to him with a much more expensive rig. But your reliability in the long run, you hope that $3,000 or $2,000 plus scope is going to be a little more reliable in the long run, or track a little bit better as the turrets start wearing. It should hold up longer.
Mm-hmm. So now that's something I don't think we actually did get into, which is the turrets and their reliability. What do people look for in that? Because I mean, I have seen a ton of different options when it comes to turrets.
Well, I mean, again, if you're talking turrets, the feel of the turret is important. Meaning, you want to be able to count the clicks just by feel or sound. That's kind of hard to test on the internet, but it's pretty easy to read the reviews and see how well mechanically they feel. The long-term reliability, that's something you just got to look at the reputations and look at who's using it and how much you're going to use it. We know there's a lot of folks that not go out very often, or they'll have multiple weapons, right? And they may take that one long-range weapon out and really go out to a range that they can go out to 800, 1,000 yards once a year. You're not putting a lot of stress on that scope, right? So you're not going to wear it out. Where if you're taking classes, or you're fortunate enough you own some land and you're out there every weekend, and you may want to put a little more into it because you're putting more stress on it.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing is you do want the turrets to match the reticles in most cases when you have exposed turrets you're dialing. It really just makes using them together easier. And back to if you're using what I call it sniper scope, you want exposed turrets that you can easily access because that's part of how you're using in that situation. Hunting, in most cases, you zero it, you put the cap on. You don't want a hurt turret that you can actually bump into and accidentally get off zero while you're walking through the woods, and then you go to take the shot and you're off. So you want either cap turrets or lock turrets for hunting situation.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Moving on to fixed power scopes, there's the ACOGs, which have become so popular. I guess what are the real advantages of an ACOG? Well,
I mean, the glass clarity is just phenomenal. It's one of the few that you look through and you say, yeah, okay, this is better. I mean, the clarity is just there. The image quality, and they're rugged, and they've got they've got some now with battery powers, but the traditional ACOG that we think of in most cases is their dual illumination model, which is fiber optics for daylight, tritium for night, and very low light. So you don't need a battery. I mean, it's the perfect worst case scenario optic I can have is because it's going to work, and they're built to such rugged standards. So I won't call it the perfect AR optic because people are using ARs for so many different things nowadays. But if you look at the traditional sense of what the AR or the M16 was designed for, the ACOG fits it pretty well. It's close range to mid range, rugged, nothing to turn, fixed power, and so that's why they've been so popular for so long.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know the last time I did an Appleseed shoot with known distance, I was using a Trigicon ACOG, and it took so much work out of the thing. I wasn't having to adjust my iron sights. It was just, okay, what distance am I at? Okay, put the crosshair on that distance and away we go. And
Right.
it was really nice. And I also wasn't having to worry about anything because we were not running with the rifles, but we were having to do a lot of moving up and down the line all day long. And there was never a worry of, have I bumped the scope? Has it gotten out
Yeah.
of zero? It was locked in and just always ready to go, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they just still flat work. Again, the variables now, the 1 to 6 and now even the 1 to 8 variables have become pretty popular. But, like you said, it's sometimes simple as best. They just flat work.
So now getting into red dots, those have become so popular in the last few years. And I've personally finally started to get into them. I've got some of yours. I've got some of or one of the Aimpoints, I should say, not some. But it seems like they can be very inexpensive or very, very expensive. What's the real cost difference there in those?
The range is certainly much smaller than a scope. So if you're looking at the top of the line, the Aimpoint, the Geotechs, I mean, you're looking at the $500-$600 price range. So the range is much narrower. Where the entry level stuff, and our stuff is the $100, or there's even some that are less. So you have a narrow range at a scope, and unlike scopes, they kind of all do the same thing. They put a dot on the target. So what does come into play is some of the cheaper ones have horrible parallax error. There's no adjustment, meaning that if you're trying to shoot at 100 yards, then you can be pretty far off depending on your head position. So that's really the one thing with a red dot that can come into play. There's plenty of them now that's not an issue with at the $100 plus price range, and it's certainly not an issue when you get up into the higher end ones.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's typically reliability, aim points. Then the battery life has been the real plus because again, unlike the ACOG, if the battery dies, you don't have an optic. Right?
Yeah.
You're back to your iron sights. Now there's some lower price ones coming out with some of that extreme battery life. But that's really been what their claim to fame, and they're just rugged. They're just well made, and they're true military grade optics. So again, it's a much simpler decision than a scope. And we love selling our primary arm stuff, but if you got the budget, get an Aimpoint and Geotech. And they're just it's a better product, and they're building it for the law enforcement military market.
Yeah.
But I'll add that. I mean, the other decision there's plenty of people that, like we probably are, that you wind up, especially in the AR world, with multiple ARs. And yeah, you may have that Aimpoint Geotech on one or two, then you say, well, man, I got four more. I'd love to put a red dot on them. And that's where the lower price ones can come in handy. They're good for training. They work the same way too. That's the real advantage of it. You're training the same way with all the weapons that have a red dot on it. If you set them up with the same height, your cheek well's the same, and everything's the same, if the budget doesn't allow, you can have that Aimpoint Geotech on the ones that you will need to depend on or want to depend on for a home defense or that kind of situation. But you can have one on all your training weapons that operates the same way.
Mm-hmm. And that makes perfect sense. And that's actually how I ended up with now a couple of different red dots. I think two of yours and one of the Aimpoint. And that's why it was like, okay, well, the Aimpoint was fun and all, but I don't want to spend that much money for rifles that aren't my kind of go-to rifle. Not that I'm necessarily actually expecting the zombie apocalypse, but at least the rifle I call my go-to rifle.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Very cool. And it's funny because I think that was a big thing for me when I was looking at, and actually I bought yours. I bought one from you before, or I should say, because you also do sell the Aimpoints and everything else. I bought one of your primary arms red dots first, because I was like, okay, well, I just want some kind of optic on this rifle while I figure stuff out. And I put yours on. It was like, wow, this is actually really nice. I mean, I don't really see anything wrong with it. And then I put on the Aimpoint next to it, and I think that was really it for me. I was like, wow, looking through the glass, I really don't see a difference. But when you look at the specs of, okay, well, I can submerge this thing down to however many meters versus this one, it's, don't really stick this one in the water and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, and we've seen too, Aimpoint's done a great job of coming out with some that are a lower price. And if you look at the specs, that's really it. I don't need something that's going to be waterproof down to 30 meters. You need something that I can drop it if I drop it in the water, it's not going to crap out on me.
Yeah.
So, exactly right. Again, in the red dot world, it's putting a dot on the target. Its function is much simpler than when we start talking scopes, but the reliability and the battery life, and in the case of Geotech, there is one different in Geotech. I see. If their technology is a little different in that there is no signature from the front. So from the front, you see nothing. So there are situations that patented technology has a little bit of advantage. Ours or Aimpoint, you can put a kill flash on the front that will generally knock that out. But I did want to add that their technology is a little different than most other red dots on the market.
Oh, okay. See, now that was one of the things when I was going for red dots. It was kind of hard for me to figure out, like, all right, well, what's the difference between Geotech and Aimpoint, just to name two that are bigger brands that people are familiar with. For me, the only thing I could really tell was, okay, there's a big difference in battery life.
Yeah, and the Geotech, it's a holographic technology, and like I said, that's the biggest difference in a military or law enforcement situation. I mean, the signature for the front's pretty tiny.
Mm-hmm.
Right, you're going to see a very tiny dot from the front of a tube type red dot or an LED red dot like an Aimpoint or ours. So it's pretty small, but that is the difference in the technology when you get into an Geotech. And I think their patent's pretty close to expiring, but there's still no one else that's using that technology.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure they're well once it actually officially expires, but that's the difference.
Okay.
But again, mechanically you put a kill flash on the front of an Aimpoint, and it in essence knocks that out. Mm-hmm. You don't see it from the front.
Do the kill flashes impact the clarity or anything at all?
It does reduce some of the light. You'll see because it's got that honeycomb on it. I've used them, and I don't notice a difference. It will look a little darker. I mean, I shouldn't say you will notice there. And in most situations, it's not necessary. It's funny, again, I'm not a hunter, but we had a guy that contacted me about a kill flash for one of ours, and he says that, the turkey hunting is one of the few cases where they've got such great eyesight. They'll see the tiny little dot if there's not a kill flash on it. And so that was real, this is a case where the customer really educated me, and we started offering a kill flash option. And I'm sure there's other game that's the case, but he was really into turkey hunting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember that being when my dad got into turkey hunting. I remember that being like a really big deal.
Yeah, they'll see even the reflection of the lens, or in the case of our red dots, they will actually see that little bitty tiny dot that you can see from the front, and that'll spook them. So that was really fascinating.
So here's kind of an unusual question, or maybe not that unusual, but rather specific. So I've started to get personally more into 300 blackout recently. For me personally, and in the environment I'm in, that round seems to make the most sense for an urban environment, also for suppression. But one of the things I was curious about, because there's a couple of different bullet weights for 300 blackout that have become popular, even in the subsonic range. And I was looking at an Geotech, and it had and I was looking at yours also, I think, and it had a bullet drop compensator on it. But I was curious, I was like, well, those are interesting, but I don't see anybody rating, what grain weight that's rated for necessarily. So how accurate are those bullet drop reticles?
Again, this is going to get to the design of the reticle. So we've partnered with a guy named Dimitri, I'm going to misturn, a reticle savant, he sees things in reticles that no one else sees. So if you look at the instructions, he will tell you how to zero it based on velocity, which is really what you're trying to get to. You got your barrel length and the weight of the bullet, but you're really trying to get to what's the velocity and what's the weight, what's it going to do once it leaves the barrel. Mm-hmm. And he will tell you where it's at. A good example is our 5.56 reticle, and it applies to 300 blackout as well. It's going to be dead on with 5.56. You just got to zero it a little differently. And now, when I say dead on, it means you're not going to shoot at 400 yards and do a 1-inch group.
Right.
400 yards, if you're in with an 8-inch circle, you're on. Right. And so you can use that same reticle for 308. you adjust it, you zero a difference. Now, at about 600 yards, it's no longer effective because the drop is so severe that you're well beyond that range that you're trying to do with a hunting or self-defense reticle.
Mm-hmm.
So the 300 blackout applies the same way. He will tell you how to zero it and tell you, okay, with that heavier bullet, it's going to be on to 300 yards. Typically, 300 blackout, you're not going that far out.
Right.
So it actually makes it a little bit easier because, once that heavier bullet really starts dropping, you're farther out than you're going to be using it for anyway.
Mm-hmm.
There are reticles that can be effective on a pretty broad range of 300 blackout for the hunting situation, right? Where you're not trying to shoot a 1-inch group at 300 yards. You're trying to hunt hogs, right? And as long as you're in that sweet spot, you're going to make the kill.
Now, when it comes to the care and feeding of optics, I know, especially with some of those coatings, you have to be pretty careful with what you use to clean your optics. What should people use and what should people never, ever use to clean optics with?
Funny, I mean, I recommend most cases, unless there's something on it, just a soft cloth. There are some commercial cleaners. I don't ever recommend the lens pins unless you're sure there's absolutely no dirt on them, because sometimes you'll take the pin and if there's some grit or gravel on them, or sand, you'll actually scratch it. So something that's specifically made for optics, U.S. Optics recommends acetone, and you would think that would be too aggressive. So I don't tend to recommend it. They obviously know their coatings real well, and that's what they recommend for cleaning. And that's what actually most of the factories use in the factory for cleaning, even after the lenses are quoted. So it's generally safe because it evaporates so quickly. Again, you use one of the commercial products. If there's something you have to get off, for the most part, just a soft cloth will clean the dust off or the dirt, and that's generally where the problem is.
That's funny that you brought up about the lens pen, because I remember the first optic I bought myself, it came with a lens pen, and I got this flash of my father, who was really, really been into photography for a very long time, and he even has some Hasselblad, some pretty crazy cameras. And I know when it comes to cleaning those lenses, if I'm removing some, don't get within 10 feet of me and leave me alone. And I use, it's this almost Japanese process of using compressed air and then cleaners and everything else. So that's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up about the pen, because I've always wondered, to me, it just seems like, well, you just take the dirt and kind of grind it against the glass.
Yeah, they get packed with some high-end optics. But that's just, again, it's like a lot of things. It's, your personal preference. But for the most part, what you're trying to avoid is rubbing that grit. That's why you say with the cameras, they'll use compressed air. You're just trying to get the grit off. So unless you've touched it or unless something's gotten spattered onto it that you have to actually clean off, you're trying to get the dust off.
Well, cool. Well, now going back to primary arms, you guys don't just do optics. Y'all have gotten into almost everything, including selling some pretty cool AR-15s. I know I recently got one of your got a radical arm from you that will soon become an SBR if the ATF ever gets back to me with a tax stamp. So now, how did y'all end up expanding out beyond optics?
Let me go back to optics for a second. And for the listeners, this was not planned, I promise. One thing we've done, yesterday we introduced an ACOG with one of our reticles in it. And I'll just take a second to talk about that, because that's something Trigicon's never done. Again, I don't want to speak for them, but I think what caught their attention is this reticle has a couple patents on it. And when you talk patents, you can patent the way something looks like pretty easily. So a lot of reticles that say patent, they just patent what they look like. In this case, we have a utility patent, which means the way it functions was totally unique and patentable. And I think that's what gave us the credibility for them to do it. So we've got the TA31, the 4-power ACOG with our ACSS reticle in it. That's huge news for us, and we're really, really proud to be partnering with Trigicon on that.
Oh, that's awesome. So what's different about this?
You have to go look at the images on the website that talk about the reticle. So there's ranging built in to the reticle, accurate ranging. There's wind leads built into the reticle and bullet drop. So what I mean by wind leads is let's say you're using the bullet drop to hold up for a 300 or 400 yard shot. Well, the wind comes into play. Now you've got wind leads at 300 or 400 yards as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so, again, part of the instructions, you really dial it in specifically for your application. It's optimized for 5.56. You can use it for 308 out to about 600 yards. We've got videos. We've handed this to pretty novice shooters, and they're getting hits at 600 yards with an AR. And a little more experienced users are getting 800-yard hits with an AR using just a reticle. And in some cases, unknown distances by ranging a silhouette-sized target. So it's the functions that are built into the reticle that make it unique.
And so y'all partnered with Trijicon on this?
Yeah, I mean, we went to them and said, can we have you do a run of this scope with our reticle? And the first answer was, we never do that. And then we got the utility patent, and we went back and said, this is a real deal. This is something that we think a lot of people would be interested in. They looked at the reticle and said, yeah, okay, we'll do this. This reticle is not made to look cool. It actually works. That's what makes it different, and why I think they were willing to do it. And they said, this is a real advancement in reticle technology. And having an ACOG was just super platform. We've always had the situation where there was a price point we were at, and there was a customer, just what you said, you want to, top of the line, the most rugged optic you can get. You're not going to buy what's been our typical optic. And so this was just a good move for us. And the reticle has been a big focus for us now for the past, I think, at least 3 years since we've been partnering with Dimitri. He does so much for us. He does our testing. He's our face on Facebook, but his real focus is he can look at a reticle and make it do stuff that up until this time people haven't been able to figure out. So that's the reticle. I just posted it on AR-15. Again, there are people that know the reticle, but there's a whole bunch of people that didn't really look at us because they just didn't consider stuff in our price range. And
so this is coming out as a Primary Arms branded.
No, it's a Trijicon ACOG with our ACS reticle. We just have the exclusive on it right now. And at some point that could change. We hope that as popular as we hope it is, we hope that other people will want to buy it, and we may do some kind of license agreement. Right now it's an exclusive. We had them do a run of it with our reticle. And again, it's something that they've just never done. So we're really proud of that. And I can't speak officially for them, but I think it was because it really is a functional reticle. And it just works for 5.56 for the AR that scope is really designed for. It just works. To your other question, the other things we're getting into, we kind of have fun with it. I think that's really the biggest part of our growth is we do it because it's fun. We do it because it's the right way to do it. We try to take that approach with customer service. We want to treat people the way we want to be treated. But we were Daniel Defense's Dealer of the Year last year, and that was just a great thing for us because it's a higher end brand. We recognize that we've become more than just the low end optics guys, and now we're even in the optics where we're moving up. I mentioned the ACOG. We've got our own line coming out of Japan that's at the higher end. But just as a whole, now we're recognized as just a great place to buy. AR, we've really branched out in the AK world as well. We want to have that same reputation that we carry everything AK related.
Oh, that's really good to know, because that's actually probably my next adventure is going to be an AK.
Yeah, it's a little harder. There's so little standardization that it's been a challenge, but we sent a bunch of our customer service guys to a recent AK Armors course here to try and get some more knowledge among staff of when someone calls in, we can answer the question and have the knowledge to answer it.
Well, very cool. So what are all the different ways people can, obviously there's your website, primaryarms.com. And you all are also on Facebook, as you said.
Big presence on AR15.com. But that's the one place that we like to interact with our customers and talk about what they want and what we're kind of thinking that may be coming. We have a storefront in Houston for any of the locals. Small storefront. We do a lot of will call business, meaning that you can come in. We got knowledgeable guys, and you can order anything on the website and just pick it up, or you can order it ahead of time and pick it up. We're talking about a new building, and the dream is a drive-through will call window for the locals, so they can order it and have it ready to pick up, and just drop by and pick it up.
That's really neat. I'm looking forward to that. Well, very cool. Well, Marshall, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your knowledge of optics with us.
Sure. I'm glad to. I enjoyed it.
Show notes, links, and your comments associated with this episode can be found at www.intherabbithole.com/E150. And one more time, do you get at least $1 worth of value out of each episode of ITRH? That would add up to roughly $4.33 a month worth of benefit you get from this show. Now, for as little as $2.50 a month, you could be supporting the work we do here. That's 1/5 the price of a single box of gun food a month. Visit itrh.net today to find out more about the ITRH Armada benefits and what extra value you'll receive from becoming a supporting member. Again, that's itrh.net. Check it out and become a member today. Military and first responders, email me at itrh@intherabbithole.com to get a special discount. With that, we wrap up episode 150 from the Lone Star State. Till next time, stay safe and sound.